Hello and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold. As always, I'm joined by Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of our listeners. We took a week off of the podcast over the holidays, and it was a pretty silent week off because not much happened with the Tigers or the baseball industry as a whole.
Yeah. Happy holidays to everybody out there for sure. There's even apparently some sort of transaction freeze that happens during the holiday season. I don't know when it starts and when it stops. I'm not sure who does know this, but that's why we haven't had any resolution with the Justin Henry Malloy designation for assignment. He hasn't been claimed by anybody because I think things were frozen. So if you feel like the Tigers weren't doing much, you're not alone because nobody was doing much.
I've heard rumblings that the deadline for that is January 7th. So if we are looking for an end date to the Justin Henry Malloy saga, it may very well be right around that January 7th mark, give or take a couple of days. So we'll see what happens there. Definitely something to keep an eye on this week. As for overall activity, I'm expecting things to pick up throughout the first half of January. I think we're going to see some of the big names sign here in the near future. And if certain players don't sign by about January 15th to 20th, that's typically when we see their market start to crash. So if you're holding out for that Christmas miracle, Alex Bregman to the Tigers, then you better hope he isn't signed by the final week of January. If he is still not signed by then, the final week of January, I do think the Tigers, with their wait-and-see approach, could jump into the mix. But otherwise, I'm still not expecting Bregman to the Tigers because, like we mentioned, the interest has been lukewarm all offseason. But the Tigers did sign 3 pitchers to minor league contracts recently. Right-handed reliever Scott Effross, right-handed reliever Woo-Suk Go, and right-hander Dylan File. Now, some notes here. Dylan File, who is a starter, he signed a minor league contract, but it's just a regular old minor league contract. He did not receive an invitation to MLB spring training, so he won't be in the big league clubhouse in Lakeland once it's time for spring camp, but he is a starter. So that'll be starter depth for the Tigers, probably bouncing between AA and AAA. Like, to me, this is Austin Bergner 2.0, if you're familiar with that name. Chris, that's not the worst thing to have in the organization, to have somebody who can bounce up and down between AA and AAA, and maybe the Tigers can tap into some upside.
Yeah, absolutely. You always have more innings than you can cover with actual prospects or guys you think you want to give time to the major leagues one day. So you need some veterans down there in the minors just to eat those innings. And this offseason has, you mentioned Austin Berger, there have been a lot of guys who left that kind of AA, AAA level in the offseason. It was just their turn to go. So yeah, they need some more bodies for sure.
Woo-Suk Go, he's a reliever the Tigers are re-signing for 2026 after signing him in June 2025. He had a 4.29 ERA across 21 innings in 14 games for AAA Toledo last season. We'll see if he becomes anything. He was a really big deal coming out of Korea when he signed with the Padres. Didn't end up working out. Now he's with the Tigers. We'll see if he becomes anything. It's a 5-pitch mix, fastball, splitter, slider. In that 5-pitch mix, I'm not expecting a whole lot. He's still awaiting his MLB debut, but did you see anything from Woo-Suk Go after the Tigers picked him up, or do you think he's kind of just a depthy reliever ad?
Yeah, there was nothing that stood out when we watched him. It was, when you watch these guys at AAA, every now and then you go, hey, that might work. Like, I went and I found a Tanner Rainey outing last year, and I was like, hey, look at this, 97 getting swings and misses. But it's about being able to do it every time out, and you'll see some flashes from Woo-Suk Go. But yeah, I'm not expecting a ton outside of an emergency situation. The Effross signing was kind of interesting to me. I don't know if you want to talk about that. He's a name I actually remember because he, once upon a time, when the Cubs were bad, they traded him straight up for a top 100-ish prospect. I think it's Hayden Wesneski, and he had a good season. And then I think he got hurt and hasn't done much since. But once upon a time, there was a pretty good reliever in there. So I'm interested to see what he can do.
Yeah, you're right. The big name here is Scott Effross. Among these 3 names, I mean, this is a 32-year-old sidearm reliever. He's pitched in parts of 4 big league seasons for the Cubs and the Yankees. About 85 innings in his MLB career with a 3.59 ERA. And yes, his best season occurred back in 2022. It was a 2.54 ERA with 15 walks and 62 strikeouts across 56 and 2/3 innings in 60 games between the Cubs and the Yankees. Then he had Tommy John surgery. That happened in October of 2022. He missed the entire 2023 season, and he hasn't been the same since coming back from the elbow surgery. In 2025, it was an 8.44 ERA in 11 MLB games and a 6.37 ERA in 28 AAA games. So he struggled at the big league level. He struggled at the AAA level. He doesn't get any whiffs. He doesn't generate any strikeouts. His fastball average is just 89 miles an hour. So you're looking at a sidearm reliever who limits contact and keeps the ball on the ground because he locates his pitches, which could be useful, but I think he has to earn his way into innings with the Tigers. Like, to me, Scott Efros is pretty much Chase Lee, but maybe just a little bit better. I never thought very highly of Chase Lee, but I don't hate the idea of having a sidearm reliever in the bullpen, or at least as an option if he's going to be in AAA Toledo to start the year, and then you see what he ends up becoming. I also want to get into position players on minor league contracts, because aside from Tomas Nido at the catcher position, the Tigers have not signed any position players to minor league contracts. Do you have any thoughts on what position they should target to add either depth to the organization or competition in spring training?
Yeah, I mean, I do think generally, this pitching heavy approach they've taken is fine because you always need more pitching. But yeah, as you said, they haven't added really anybody, and it can be a little bit hard to find upgrades for the Tigers just because they're not necessarily awful at any spot, and they're also not necessarily great. They're kind of between okay and good. But I'll take a page from my buddy Rogelio here and mention the outfield, I think, because they have a pretty set outfield when you look at it. Riley Green, Parker Meadows, Gary Carpenter, Matt Vierling, Winsel Perez. But all of those guys have been injured, in some cases multiple times over the last few years. And so you could picture a scenario where you just, and we almost saw it last year, right? Vierling was out for basically the whole year. Meadows was out for much of the year. So you need some more depth there. And you have Jahmai Jones, but I don't know if you can count on him doing exactly what he did last year, or staying good if he's pushed into a larger role. And then beyond him, you have Trey Cruz, who they added to the 40-man roster. And then it's Max Clark, one of your top prospects, who may not be ready to help in the outfield yet because, Akil Baddoo is gone. Malloy probably will be gone. So I think they should probably bring in some more outfield bodies, some more Brewer Hicklins, if you will.
I love that you mentioned the outfield, and I love that you mentioned Jahmai Jones, because that's right where I'm going. I think outfield first and foremost, but not only just any outfielder. I want the Tigers to go out and get an outfielder who can take Jahmai Jones's role, just in case Jahmai Jones is a flash in the pan. Because we already know Jahmai Jones can't play defense. So if his offense slips even a little bit, then the Tigers could be without a right-handed hitting outfielder who performs against left-handed pitchers. You don't have Andy Ibanez anymore. And if Jahmai Jones falls off, you don't have Jahmai Jones either. And yes, Hao-Yu Lee could play the Andy Ibanez role in the infield, but you got to have somebody to give you some outfield innings just in case you need them in that Jahmai Jones type role. So for me, the guy that I look to is Randal Grichuk. I think that is a great option for the Tigers if he would be willing to accept a minor league contract at this point. I don't know where his market is. I don't know if the Tigers are interested in him, but I do think Randal Grichuk, yes, he had a down year in 2025, and that could push him into minor league contract territory. He's entering his age 34 season. He's a 12-year MLB veteran, but he has a very long track record of hitting left-handed pitchers. It's over an 800 OPS in his career. Back in 2024, it was a 900 OPS against lefties. So to go out and get a right-handed hitting outfielder who can hit against left-handed pitchers. And the one thing that separates Randal Grichuk from Jahmai Jones is that Randal Grichuk can actually play outfield defense. Jahmai Jones, the Tigers, they avoided putting him in the outfield last year. So I think if you want to bring someone into camp, both to push Jahmai Jones, but then also to maybe even take his role, even if it's not on the opening day roster, even if it's just early in the 2025 season as insurance, in case Jahmai Jones doesn't end up hitting like we expect him to, I think Randal Grichuk could be a really good ad for that role.
Yeah, I've liked Randal Grichuk for a long time as that sort of right-handed hitting power outfielder. And he's just a fun story too, because he was taken exactly one pick before Mike Trout by the Angels in that draft. In 2009, the Angels had back-to-back picks, and supposedly the story was that they had a scout who was all in on Mike Trout, and just to mess with him a little bit, they took Grichuk before him, and then they took Trout. But anyway, he's got 212 career home runs. That's nothing to sneeze at for a veteran. So yeah, I think he would be a great ad. As you said, if you can get him on a minor league deal, that would be terrific.
All right, let's get into the big two. Question one of the big two. What are 3 New Year's resolutions for the Tigers in the 2026 calendar year? I wrote about this in Freep.com, so we'll start with you, Chris. What are your 3 New Year's resolutions for the Tigers?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I worded this correctly, but my first one is going to be find a real number 2 starter. And I don't care how you do it. I don't care if it's Flaherty returning to 2024 form. I don't care if it's Casey Mize having a career year in his platform season, or Reese Olson staying healthy, or Troy Melton making that big leap. They need a real legit number 2 who's a threat to go 7 innings every start. And if they don't build one in-house, they need to go out and get one at some point during the year if you want to go far in the playoffs. So that was my number 1. My number 2 is sort of along those lines. It'd be nice to find a regular shortstop or third base, regular at one of them. I'm not even being greedy. Just one of those 2 positions, have a guy you plug in every day. It would be ideal if it's Colt Heath and Kevin McGonigle. Then you have 2 of them, maybe. But maybe it's Vierling and McKinstry, or McKinstry and Baez, or maybe Trey Sweeney fixes his swing and becomes a viable big leaguer again. Just somebody you can count on every day on the left side of the infield. I don't think it's too much to ask for. And my final New Year's resolution is to make a splash. Now, it feels like it's asking way too much from this front office. That's just not the way they operate. But, I see an awful lot of negativity around the Tigers. And it's kind of odd because this is a young team with a lot of young talent, particularly on offense, that's coming off 2 straight years of making the postseason. But because they don't make these big splashy moves, I think a lot of fans get frustrated. They complain that they're, trying to win on paper and not spending money. They're being too cheap. So just make that big deal. It might not make you that much better, but you get that middle of the order bat, you get that frontline starter, something like that. And I think the fans will feel a lot better, at least for a little bit. And there's something to that.
So my 3 New Year's resolutions, number 1, sign veteran George Springer for leadership. I want to make this super clear. George Springer is not a free agent this offseason, but he is a free agent next offseason, which is still in the 2026 calendar year. So I mentioned this a few years back when it was Alex Bregman's year to become a free agent and he was entering the final year of his contract with the Astros. That was actually one of my New Year's resolutions for the Tigers way back then was, hey, once the next offseason rolls around, go out there and sign Alex Bregman. The Tigers made a big push, as we know, and they finished as the runner-up to the Red Sox. But I think go out and get George Springer for his leadership. I think the Tigers need a veteran leader. I think they've been missing that for too many years. You look inside that clubhouse. Yes, Matt Vierling is a leader. Yes, Jake Rogers is a leader. Yes, Tarik Skubal, in a way, is a leader. But I don't think they have that true leader that's going to give them that day in, day out performance on the field, but also have a been there, done that type of a mentality with that veteran presence. Like there's just a lot that somebody like an Alex Bregman or a George Springer would bring to a team like the Tigers, especially with as many young players and up and coming players that they have. I just think about George Springer as a mentor to a Riley Green and a Max Clark coming up. I just think about how valuable that could be, not only for the Tigers when they have a guy like George Springer, but also even when George Springer is written off into the sunset, how much of an impact that could have on the careers of a Riley Green and a Max Clark specifically as outfielders, but also other players as well. We know for leadership, the best fit is Alex Bregman, but if the Tigers don't sign him this offseason, after they finished runner-up for him last offseason, then I do think George Springer emerges as that next best fit once he gets to free agency after the 2026 season. And it's a good fit for the Tigers because A.J. Hinch loves him. Like A.J. Hinch has this long-standing relationship with George Springer. It's unmatched among active players. It's almost like a father-son type of relationship, if you will, between the two of them. Like that is how close A.J. Hinch and George Springer are. So much so that when A.J. Hinch came to manage the Tigers, he tried to recruit George Springer to sign with the Tigers. And of course, George Springer eventually signed 6 years, $150 million with the Blue Jays, and he becomes a free agent again in November 2026. But A.J. Hinch wanted George Springer to join the Tigers. And instead, we saw the Tigers end up getting a different option there for the outfield. It was a shorter term deal, but A.J. Hinch wanted George Springer. And I think that in a world in which George Springer is entering his age 37 season at that point, you're not going to have to give him a long-term deal. So it could fit exactly what Scott Harris wants. We haven't seen the Tigers go out and sign a position player in free agency beyond 1 year. And if George Springer is entering his age 37 season, it's not going to be more than a 2-year deal for a guy like that. Maybe high AAV, but it's not going to be more than a 2-year deal. So I think it's perfect both for A.J. Hinch and for Scott Harris. And I think the leadership would really benefit the Tigers. The second thing, extend top prospect Kevin McGonigle. That is number 2 on the New Year's resolution list, just because, look, smart teams, they extend their rising stars. We've seen 5 players in MLB history. They've received contracts of $100 million or more at age 21 or younger. That's Ronald Acuna Jr., Roman Anthony, Jackson Merrow, Wander Franco, and Julio Rodriguez. Those are the 5 players to get $100 million or more at age 21 or younger. Kevin McGonigle, he turns 22 in mid-August. So let's get a long-term deal done for Kevin McGonigle before he turns 22 in mid-August. I think that could be right around the time that he makes his MLB debut if he's not on the opening day roster. But this guy is the number 1 prospect for the Tigers, the number 2 prospect in all of baseball. He's the real deal. He's proven himself all the way along the line. And you talk about the episode we had 2 weeks ago, we talked to Dan Zimborski from Fangraphs. He's the creator of the Zips projection system. And the Zips projection system, that projects Kevin McGonigle to be like Alex Bregman, Mookie Betts, Gary Sheffield. Those are some of the names tied to Kevin McGonigle. So I think if there's a number 2 on the list for me, it's got to be extending Kevin McGonigle. He's the real deal. And additionally, the Tigers haven't committed to McGonigle on the opening day roster. It seems like they want to start him at AAA Toledo because they want to prioritize his development. So we know McGonigle is going to come up at some point in 2026, but there's this uncertain timeline. I think that could create some leverage for the Tigers in contract negotiations if we do get to mid-August and Kevin McGonigle really wants to play in the big leagues. The Tigers could dangle a contract extension in front of him and get him to grab at it, kind of like they did with Colt Keith. Now, it's going to cost a lot more, I think, to get Kevin McGonigle than it did to get Colt Keith to sign a long-term extension, but I think the negotiating tactics could be similar. And then number 3, and I know I've listed them, George Springer, Kevin McGonigle, and now this, but this may be number 1 because the Tigers need to prepare for life without ace Tarik Skubal. Tigers don't have any pitching. They don't have a number 2 starter, as you mentioned. And when Tarik Skubal becomes a free agent for 2026, what does it look like for the Tigers? You're looking at a rotation without Skubal and, by the way, without Casey Mize and Jack Flaherty, both impending free agents as well. You're going to have Jackson Jobe, Reese Olson, and Troy Melton in 2027. That's just not enough. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Jackson Jobe doesn't miss enough bats. Reese Olson, there's injury history. Troy Melton, there's reliever risk. And then the bigger concern beyond that is the Tigers don't have a top-ranked starting pitching prospect in their farm system. Andrew Sears is a left-hander. He's number 14 in the organization according to MLB Pipeline. And he's generated a lot of internal buzz as this underrated arm to watch, but even he struggled in Double-A. So there's no guarantee there, and he has a lot to prove before he joins the Tigers, and he's already 23 years old. So Andrew Sears is as much of a question mark as anybody, even though he's generating some of this internal buzz as an underrated starter to watch out for. So I don't think the Tigers are prepared for life without Skubal, but it's not too late to fix that problem. They have to do it in the 2026 calendar year. They cannot wait until Tarik Skubal is gone to fix this problem. I think it's a prospect for prospect type of a trade where you're leveraging your offense first position players who struggle defensively, guys like Josue Briseño, Thyron Lorenzo, Max Anderson, and go get an MLB ready starter capable of joining the rotation in the second half of 2026. The next best option, go spend in free agency. Just sign a number 2 starter who you can count on both this season and next season. Or if you want to wait a year and Tarik Skubal is going to go be a free agent, like go sign the next best starter in free agency and do your best to replace him. Either one of those ways works. I think it's a prospect for prospect trade. It is signing a big name starting pitcher in free agency. But if the Tigers aren't going to do either of those two things because we know they don't like to spend and we know they don't like to trade their prospects, then just trade Tarik Skubal for pitching prospects. Because the reality of the situation is the Tigers, they have to solve this problem where they have to backfill for the loss of Tarik Skubal, and that plan can't just hinge solely on Jackson Jobe replacing Tarik Skubal as the ace because that's not good enough. There needs to be a long-term plan in place, and it's got to be put in place within the next 10 months. And if to do it, you got to trade Skubal for pitching prospects, so be it, because the Tigers just don't have enough to support themselves in a world without Tarik Skubal, and the clock continues to tick. So those are my 3. We've got George Springer, Kevin McGonigle, and Tarik Skubal. I think those are 3 really big talking points going into 2026.
Let me just pop in real quick about George Springer. I know people might think like, oh, he's going to be too old. He's over the hill. But that's the exact same age, 37, when the Tigers signed Torrey Hunter back in 2013 as their kind of veteran leadership fielder. And it makes a lot of sense to me. So I like that one. And of course, I'm all in on bringing McGonigle in forever and finding pitching. I already said. So yeah, those are good. I think we've resolved to make the Tigers better this year.
Question 2 of the big 2. What were your favorite moments from the Tigers in the 2025 calendar year?
Well, somebody furnished me with a list of a lot of these potential, but when I do think back, there are a handful that stick out to me. There was, it was a fun season to get into the postseason again, even though it was kind of scary down the stretch. But I do like the first thing that stuck out to me was the Javier Baez 2-homer game where he hit I think he hit a 3-run bomb early in the game and then another one at the end of the game to walk it off
against the Red Sox.
Just an electric atmosphere. It kind of ridiculous. It was like, what happened? Where is this Javi Baez come from? And then, he went away kind of, but that was an amazing game. I think a lot of people will remember the Skubal Maddox game, this dominant performance finishing with a 103-mile-an-hour fastball. And it just, one of the best pitching performances we'll see ever, probably in Detroit. I remember the Riley Green 2 homers in 1 inning game out there. And I unfortunately knew Tiger Kenley Jansen was involved in that. But yeah, I mean, that was just kind of wow. It's never been done before, right? Or there'd never been 2 home runs in the 9th inning, I think it was. And there's just a whole bunch of them. I also mentioned Riley Green's, he had a 470-foot grand slam against the A's, which was, I believe, 4th longest home run of the year in baseball. And it was his first grand slam, I believe. So that was fun. And then getting back to the playoffs, well, right before that, I will always remember Tarik Skubal trying to throw the ball between his legs. It wasn't a great moment by any means, but
classic guards ball.
I will remember that forever. And then after that, I got a couple playoff moments. One of them is Winsel Perez finally getting that big hit in Game 5 of the wild card series. He'd been struggling for so long, and he got a big hit down to the right corner that scored at least 1 run, maybe 2.
Yeah, Dylan Dingler had the big home run, and then Wenzel came up right after, and those are huge insurance runs.
Yeah, and it just, I don't know, I just kind of felt good for him, as a guy who he'd been struggling so much, and to come on there with a huge hit. And then the last one I remember, and unfortunately I've talked about this before, it's a memory that may get lost to history because of the eventual outcome of the game. But Kerry Carpenter hitting a 2-run homer off Gabe Spire, who was brought in specifically to get him out, and he just immediately gave the Tigers the lead with a monster home run. It felt like it was just like, oh, that's the moment. They're gonna pull this off, and then they just couldn't get it done.
Which was the best, because earlier in the series, they didn't go to Gabe Spire, and they let the starter pitch to Kerry Carpenter, and it was a righty, and so that was obviously advantage Kerry. They didn't go to Spire. Kerry hits the home run, and then this time around, they go to Spire, and Kerry still hits the home run. Yeah,
it was a you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't moment. So yeah, I mean, those are the ones that really stick out to me right now. But it was a season full of a lot of interesting games and a lot of fun outcomes that I could talk about as they get brought up.
You teased it at the top, but yes, I am working on my top 50 list of moments to remember for the Tigers in the 2025 calendar year. Yes, I'm a little bit late, but better late than never, because yes, we are in 2026 and I am writing about 2025. Normally I would try to get those out on New Year's Day, but it is what it is. But I'm not going to talk about my favorite moments with these ones that I'm going to mention here. I'm just going to talk about the moments that I think best define the Tigers in 2025. And they're not all happy moments. And no, I'm not going to talk about February 12th when the Alex Bregman chase ended with the Tigers as the runner-up to the Red Sox. But here are my 3 moments to remember. April 8th, Dylan Dingler takes over as the primary catcher. I think that was bound to happen at some point regardless. Just the way that things were trending, Dylan Dingler as a 2nd-round pick, some of the Tigers have prioritized throughout his development. Yes, he spent a ton of time in Double-A Erie, but eventually made the jump to Triple-A, got to the big leagues, and then Jake Rogers goes down with this injury, and Dylan Dingler has to step in, and he just took off with it. And I think that's one of the greatest moments to remember, is not the Jake Rogers injury, but just the way that Dylan Dingler took over. And this was a guy who, you go back to 2024, he did not play a single inning in the postseason. He was second guessing himself all the time in 2024 after the Tigers called him up. Remember, they traded Carson Kelly so they could call up Dylan Dingler, and that was a disaster. Like, Dylan Dingler was not ready, but he learned through that opportunity in 24, and 25 comes around, Jake Rogers goes down, and it's like, man, Dylan Dingler was scared to call pitches. He was scared to make mistakes when he was pushing the buttons on the pitch comm just at the end of 2024. How is he going to respond to being thrust into this primary catcher role? And he just took off and ran with it. Not only was he great behind the plate, but he was great at the plate as well. I thought that was a really big moment for the Tigers when they found out not only did they have a serviceable catcher in Dylan Dingler, but it sure looks like they may have a great catcher in Dylan Dingler. That's big, not only for the Tigers in 2025, but also in 26 and into the future, because he's going to be with this team for a very long time. Second one on my list, May 25th, Tarik Skubal throws a complete game shutout against the Guardians. You referenced it as the Maddox game. That's exactly what it was. It was pure dominance, 13 strikeouts, 102.6 mile an hour fastball to finish it off. It registers as 103 on the FanDuel Sports Network broadcast. That's what we're going to call it. We like to round up in this case. Tarik Skubal, 103 to finish the game in an elite Maddox performance. It was incredible when you think about a Maddox, which is a complete game under 100 pitches, and to do that with 13 strikeouts, just incredible. I think that really packages up what Tarik Skubal was for the Tigers, not only in 2025, but also in 2024 as well. He's just been a joy to watch pitch, and Tigers fans, soak it all in 2026, because you only got one more year of it. The other one that stood out to me, and this is a Tarik Skubal reference as well, and this is not a happy moment. July 31st. No, it's not the trades. It's that Scott Harris came out and said that he does not believe in a Tarik Skubal window to win. I thought that was not one of my favorite moments, because you'd love to hear him say, yes, we believe in a Tarik Skubal window to win. We're going to do everything we can to win in the next 2 years before he becomes a free agent. That's the number one priority. The World Series window is wide open. We're going to go after it. Those are things that, as if you're a fan of the team, if you're a beat writer of the team, if you're a general baseball enthusiast, like you love to see teams go after it and give it their all, especially when they have a Hall of Fame caliber pitcher on their team. But that's not what the Tigers decided to do. And at the trade deadline, Scott Harris came out and said it. And I think it defined the Tigers in 2025. And it kind of defines them in 2026 as well, because Tarik Skubal is still on this team. Scott Harris coming out and saying he does not believe in a Tarik Skubal window to win. I think that was a really big storyline for the Tigers, and it's telling in terms of how things have gone. You know, they didn't make a big splash to the trade deadline. So far this offseason, they haven't made that big splash. You know, they didn't get uncomfortable to sign Alex Bregman last offseason. You know, we'll see if they are really good going into the trade deadline. Like, are they going to, be conservative again, or are they going to get pretty aggressive if they're leading the AL Central at the trade deadline and they have a chance to make a push for the World Series? Or are they going to talk about, hey, our future is Max Clark and Kevin McGonigle and Josue Briseño? Or are they going to say, hey, the future is now? And I think a lot of Tigers fans would love to hear them say the future is now, but that's not what Scott Harris has said. And it really, to me, really came to be at that July 31st trade deadline when he talked about not believing in a Tarik Skubal window to win. So those are my three. Dylan Dingler taking over as the primary catcher, Tarik Skubal throwing a complete game shutout against the Guardians, and Scott Harris not believing in a Tarik Skubal window to win. If you want the other 49, give me a couple days. Freep.com is where you can check it out. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we are joined by Jeff Fletcher, the Los Angeles Angels beat writer for the Orange County Register. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Jeff Fletcher, Los Angeles Angels beat writer for the Orange County Register, to the Days of Roar podcast. For the first time, he has covered MLB since 1997, including the Angels since 2012, and he knows a thing or two about new Tigers reliever Kenley Jansen. Jeff Fletcher, thank you for joining the Days of Roar podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so before we get into Kenley Jansen and some other topics, I want to take a deeper dive into your past. You have been covering the Angels for quite some time, but before that, you covered the Oakland Athletics and the San Francisco Giants, including the Moneyball era for the Athletics and probably the greatest years of Barry Bonds' career with the Giants. First off, what was it like covering the Moneyball era for the Athletics? I think everyone who listens to this podcast has probably watched the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt, Jonah Hill, all about the 2002 Athletics. And as we know, the movie is based on the book by Michael Lewis. But what do you remember about covering the Moneyball era? And what was it like then seeing the events showcased first in the book and then in the movie?
Yeah, it was really cool how they just kept churning out all these really good young players, and they kept winning, with a really low payroll. And nowadays, now that I've seen the Angels for so many years, I really appreciate how hard it is to have a winning season and to win 100 games a year, and to do that when you're basically not spending a lot of money, and it's just producing these starting pitchers that come up and are really good starting pitchers that you just, oh, look, here's Tim Hudson, here's Mark Mulder, here's Barry Zito, here's Miguel Tejada, here's Eric Chavez. It's hard to just do that, and I don't even think I appreciated it at the time as much as I have since, in just seeing, how rare that is to be able to do that.
And then the greatness that is Barry Bonds. You covered his 500th home run, 600th home run, 700th home run, as well as his record-breaking home run. Where does he stack up among the players that you've covered? Because you've covered some of the best to ever do it.
Yeah, I do consider myself pretty lucky that the three of the guys I've seen the most in my career are Barry Bonds, Mike Trout, and Shohei Ohtani. And really a lot of Albert Pujols too, although it's kind of the end of Albert Pujols, so he wasn't the same. But still, those are like the top four. And that's a pretty good list of baseball players. But Barry Bonds, I know he was cheating. Obviously, everybody knows that. But just see the stuff that he did during those years, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, are just unbelievable. And I would encourage everybody who might not be old enough to remember that, or who's forgotten it, to go pop onto his baseball reference page and look at those years. And like his on base percentage in some of those years was like 550. It was ridiculous. He drew like 130 intentional walks. Nowadays Aaron Judge leads the majors with like 10. So it's just unbelievable what he was doing. And I don't care how much steroids he was taking. Nobody else could do that. And it was just pretty amazing to watch a guy, teams treat him like so afraid of him that they would, I saw him walk to the bases loaded, and actually that happened before he was on steroids. This is a thing that people forget sometimes, but it was pretty impressive. Yes.
Well, you've mentioned cheating and steroids a couple of times in your answer there. And I do want to ask about the Hall of Fame because you've been a Hall of Fame voter since 2006. And for our listeners who don't know, that is like the highest honor for a baseball writer is to be able to, vote for the Hall of Fame. Is pretty much a service time kind of a thing. And once you hit your service time, you get a chance to be able to vote for the Hall of Fame. Now, Barry Bonds didn't get into the Hall of Fame after 10 years through the BBWAA because he never received votes on 75% of the ballot. So now it's up to the contemporary era. But you were one of the writers who voted for Barry Bonds along the way. Did you wrestle with that decision at all? And what ultimately led to you giving him your vote?
Way back when, I was kind of unsure. And the year after I started voting was when the Mitchell report came out. And that was the first real kind of unbiased look at steroids in baseball. And I remember after that came out, I just came to the conclusion there were so many guys who were taking steroids that I'm not going to try to pretend that I can go back through and pick this guy did it, this guy didn't do it, whatever. Because we all know there are plenty of guys that were doing it that we think were clean. I'm not going to list the names off here, but there's probably guys that people all assume, oh, well, this player, we all know he was doing steroids, but this guy was clean. And I'm telling you, that's not true. I just say I'm not smart enough to be able to distinguish. So I'm just going to vote based on what they did on the field. And that's basically what I do. I do take into account, if I think a guy used steroids and I think that his numbers wouldn't have made the threshold otherwise. Like I never voted for Sammy Sosa, by the way. Sammy Sosa. Because Sammy Sosa to me is like a guy that really, the steroids probably made him a different player than he was. In contrast to Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, who were great before, and they were so far over the line, even with steroids, that I still vote for them. Alex Rodriguez also, I vote for. So that's kind of how I do it. I have a very low bar for integrity and a very high bar for performance. This year I only voted for 4 because there's a lot of guys, Felix Hernandez, Andy Pettit, Chase Utley, that kind of guy that you can make case for. But just to me, like if you have to kind of squint at them and think, maybe he's this and that. And I want you to be pretty clearly over the line for me to vote for you. And so I have the high bar for performance, low bar for integrity. That's how I do it.
So we've talked about the Moneyball A's, Barry Bonds in the Hall of Fame, and now the newest member of the Tigers bullpen, Kenley Jansen. Let's dig in. He signed a 1-year, $9 million contract, guarantees at least $11 million because of the buyout on the $12 million club option. Did the Angels have interest in re-signing Kenley Jansen? And what did you think when he ultimately signed with the Tigers?
Yeah, the Angels did want to re-sign him. And I kind of thought that he would. I thought that he would also want to re-sign with the Angels because his family lives in Southern California. And I think that the reason he signed with the Angels last year was because he wanted to be at home. And so I thought that they would find a way to make it work. But I think that players all say that money's not what matters, but I think it does matter. And I think the Angels were not really in a position to offer quite as much as some other teams because they have so many other holes to fill. They have to find a way to get a lead into the ninth inning before they put $10 million, $11 million into a guy to pitch the ninth inning. They would have loved to have him, but I just don't think that it matched up with them financially. I'm going to miss him personally as a writer, and you'll find out he's amazing to deal with. There was a game earlier in the season where he blew the save, but it was because somebody made an error. So it clearly was not his fault at all. And I went into the clubhouse after the game, and he was like a little annoyed that I didn't want to talk to him after blowing the save. But he was like, "Hey, don't you want to talk to me? I'm here. I'm ready. I'm waiting for you." And I was like, "Well, that's all right. This wasn't really a game that I need to ask you about blowing it because you did your job. Another guy made an error." But to him, it was like he still didn't feel like he did his job, and he still wanted to be accountable for it. So I thought that was a huge statement about his personality.
First off, that's an incredible look behind the scenes when it comes to who Kenley Jansen is as a person. Do you think, and with that being said, he can be the type of veteran who can take on a leadership role within the bullpen? Because we know that the bullpen is kind of like a team within a team. Can he be that kind of guy for some of the younger dudes who are in the Tigers pen?
Yeah, for sure. I think that he definitely took that role on with the Angels. One of the things that was kind of interesting is that he was pretty much on his own program. he showed up a lot later than other players. He didn't necessarily do the same things that everybody else did, but it was doing what he needed to do to get himself ready. And he certainly performed well. So the Angels were fine with that. Some other teams might say, hey, look, you're supposed to set an example for the other guys. We don't want you waltzing in here at, 4:30. If the bottom line is get the job done and tell other players how to get the job done, then I think he's perfect.
What about the performance on the mound? I think there were some signs that maybe the underlying metrics weren't as sharp, like decrease in the whiff rate, decrease in the strikeout rate. I think it was the lowest batting average on balls in play in his career. He stranded a ton of runners, so maybe in the future, those runners are going to score. But he still had a 2.59 ERA and 29 saves in 62 games. So with all that being said, what were your takeaways from Kenley Jansen in 2025?
There were definitely some of those kind of numbers that are red flags about his performance that he might start to fall off. But what he would say to that is that last winter, he did not really do his normal routine. His mother was very sick and she ended up passing away right before spring training. So he said that, last winter he was not in shape the way he would normally be or the way he plans to be this winter. And so I think that maybe that contributed to him not having the pure stuff that he is used to. And, he was very clear when we talked to him at the end of the year that next year is going to be better. He's going to have a different winter this winter, 25, 26. And in 26, he's going to come out and he'll be pitching better than he did in 25. So we'll see if that happens. But it does make sense that going through what he was going through with his mom last winter, that he would not be in the gym as much or not be throwing as many bullpens or that kind of stuff.
I know Kenley told you that he wants to pitch at least 4 more seasons. He told me that he wants to pitch a few more seasons. So we're looking at 3 to 4 more years. He's entering his age 38 season. He's 24 saves away from joining Mariano Rivera and Trevor Hoffman in the 500 saves club. Do you think he can actually pitch for another 4 years? And do you think there is any chance that he can make a run at 600 saves?
I mean, I never assume I would say that anybody can pitch that long, but, Rivera and Hoffman both were 40, 41 when they got done. That's how they got their 600 saves. It's certainly possible. I mean, I think he's year to year. Every year that he's good, he's going to get a chance to do it the next year. This 25 could have been his last year if he didn't perform. 26, if he performs well, he'll have a chance to pitch in 27. So it's up to him.
Just keep stacking good years and we'll see where it goes. It's a lot of good stuff there about new Tigers reliever Kenley Jansen. Again, we're talking to Jeff Fletcher, the Angels beat writer for the Orange County Register. A few other Angels topics, beginning with Zach Neto. I'm not sure if a lot of Tigers fans know this, but certain people in the Tigers organization, including some high-ranking people, were pushing for the Tigers to select Zach Neto instead of Jace Young in the 2022 draft. Of course, Jace Young, he goes number 12 to the Tigers. Then Zach Neto goes number 13 to the Angels. 3 years later, Neto has established himself as one of the best young shortstops in baseball. Meanwhile, Jace Young, he's probably the next Tigers position player to be designated for assignment. When you look at Zach Neto's first 3 seasons in the big leagues, what stands out to you? And do you think there is more upside to tap into?
I mean, yeah, there's definitely more. He's still so young, but you think he should get better. I think he could stand to strike out a little less. And, he still occasionally loses track trying to make a sensational play in the field, when it's not there. Sometimes that happens. This is all stuff of youth. But the talent is great. He's got power. He's got speed. I think there's not too many shortstops that are 25 guys and certainly could be a 30 guy. So he's definitely the best Angels young player that they have going right now.
And then Tigers fans know plenty about bad contracts. I'm talking about the Javi Baez contract, 6 years, $140 million. It was signed back in December of 2021, doesn't expire until November 2027. So Tigers fans have 2 more seasons of the Javi Baez experience, unless the Tigers buy out his contract at some point. And Angels fans, they also know about bad contracts with the worst contract in baseball history, Anthony Rendon, 7 years, $245 million. The contract expires after the 2026 season, but it's been restructured and Anthony Rendon won't play for the Angels again. Can you kind of walk us through what's going on, what's happened, how we got here, and maybe where things are headed between Anthony Rendon and the Los Angeles Angels?
First of all, it's not the worst free agent contract in history. It's not even the worst free agent contract in history that was signed in the winter of 2019, 2020 from a guy who played for the Washington Nationals. So Steven Strasburg is going to have to take that one. He signed the same deal, 7 years, $245 million, and he pitched like 20 innings. So that's worse.
That's fair.
But anyway, people, because he re-signed with the Nationals, who he just won the World Series with, people kind of give him a pass on that. But still, what he did after that contract was basically zero. But still, to your point, the Anthony Rendon deal was terrible. And what the Angels did, it's still not totally clear what they did because they haven't really talked about it, but they restructured it in some way that we don't know exactly. But so he was supposed to get $38 million in 2026. Now he's going to get less than that, but whatever less he gets is going to come in future years with interest because you're not allowed to reduce the present day value of the contract. So if they take the money and they spread it out, they're going to have to give him interest to kind of account for that. I mean, I don't really know if the Angels are saving $20 million this year or just like $10 million or the whole 38, or I have no idea at this point. But it will be interesting to see what happens over the rest of the winter, because that will tell us, exactly how much money they're saving. But it's good just to be done with it. He wasn't going to play either way. He had hip surgery, and I don't think the rehab was going that great. And in 2025, he didn't show up at all with the team. And I think that was not necessarily anything that either side regretted. I think it worked out that the Angels didn't have the distraction of him hanging around and questions about how's his rehab going? Is he going to play? Is he not going to play? And he didn't have to be around and have those questions. So I think it was both sides were happy with the way it was. And now to be continuing that in 2026, where he's not going to be forced to put his body through a bunch of rehab that was just going to be in vain because he wasn't going to be able to make it. And the Angels save a little money in the short term. We'll see how it works out, but I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, in the way the budget works, because I don't think that they're really, Artie Moreno doesn't like to defer a whole lot of money. So I doubt that they're now paying him like $2 million or something. And all of a sudden that $30 million extra dollars to spend. I don't think it's going to make that much difference, but we'll see.
Before we get out of here, I have to ask you about your book, Showtime, the inside story of Shohei Ohtani and the greatest baseball season ever played. It's an outstanding biography that chronicles the rise of Shohei Ohtani with a real emphasis on that 2021 MVP season. I've never written a book before, so for all of us who don't know, can you take us through what the actual process is like, and how did you decide that you wanted to write about Shohei Ohtani?
For me, the process of writing that book was not really what it would be like, I think, in a lot of cases to write a book, because I'd sort of already written it in 500 parts from covering Ohtani for 4 years in the major leagues. 80% of the book is just stuff that I'd already written, basically, but it's put into a different form. And for people that weren't reading all the stories, they can kind of see it. And you kind of have a little different perspective on things than you do as they're happening. You can kind of take a bigger picture look. So that's what the book gives you. And I think it's still, it's funny because I wrote this because I thought, well, we're never going to see another season like this in 2021. And then he did it again in 22 and he did it again in 23. And of course, he had these amazing seasons with the Dodgers since then, although I would argue that they still were not as good because he was not really a full-time pitcher in those years. He didn't pitch at all in 24 and only pitched like 80 or 90 innings in 25. We'll see in 26 if he can finally get back to doing what he did. But I'd not be surprised if when his career's over, we still look back and say 21, 22, and 23 were still the best seasons of his career. So it was pretty incredible. And I think that it's easy for people to forget that, in 2020, he was not good. And there was a lot of talk about, it was a bust or he can't be a two-way player. It's not going to work. And the transformation to get him to 21, which basically became the guy that we know today as Shohei Ohtani. I think this book tells people about how all that happened. So it's very useful for anybody who wants to get caught up on the story to know how did Ohtani become this amazing two-way guy that he is now. This book tells you how he became that, and then you see what happened since.
I'll never forget July of 2023, Tigers Angels at Comerica Park, and it's a doubleheader. Shohei Ohtani, he throws the complete game, one-hit shutout in game one of the doubleheader, and then he hits 2 home runs in game 2 of the doubleheader. It was probably the greatest day of baseball ever played. When you look at your time covering him, do you have a favorite Shohei Ohtani moment, memory, story from your time covering him during his tenure with the Angels?
I mean, I always say that the first game that he pitched in 21, we still had a lot of questions about him coming into 21, because like I said, in 2020, he was not very good. And everybody was sort of like, oh, this is his last chance. Is he really going to be the two-way guy that we all want to see? Is it really going to happen again? And the first game he pitches in 21, he goes out in the top of the first inning and he throws like 5 pitches at 100 miles an hour and strikes out a couple of guys. And then he comes to bat in the bottom of the first inning, hits a ball 118 miles an hour, like 430 feet, home run. And I still remember right there at that moment, it was like, oh my, this could happen again. We could finally see it. And ever since then, of course, he's been ridiculous. But that was the day that he was sort of reborn, so to speak, that the Ohtani is washed up and overrated and it's not going to work, gave way to, oh my gosh, Ohtani is amazing again. That was the day it happened.
The true definition of the GOAT. All right, Jeff, that's all I have for you. Thank you for joining the Days of Our podcast to discuss Kenley Jansen plus some other fun baseball topics like Barry Bonds and Shohei Ohtani. Maybe we can do this again before or after a Tigers-Angels series at some point during the season.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Everyone, that was Jeff Fletcher, Los Angeles Angels beat writer for the Orange County Register. We have more to discuss about the Tigers this week, but first, let's take a break. We're back, and we are going to keep talking about Kenley Jansen. Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report. Talk to me here. Kenley Jansen says he doesn't care about the closer role. He's 24 saves away from the 500 milestone, which is a really big deal. Regardless of that, regardless of Kenley Jansen in the closer role or Kyle Finnegan in the closer role or Will Vest in the closer role, how do you think the Tigers will ultimately deploy these three relievers on their path to win? AJ Hinch talks about a path to win quite often. You know, get the starting pitcher through 6 innings. If you have the lead, then you have a path to win. How do they use these three? What is the best way to go about it as they're trying to win games, especially close games, maybe big games against interdivision rivals, and you're up by 1 and you have the lead and you have these three pitchers you can use? How do you deploy them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be pretty similar to what we saw last year in terms of the usage there. I think Hinch is going to mix and match based on matchups. But what I think we'll see is we'll probably see Tyler Holton and Kyle Finnegan taking on those pockets that might include a lefty or two, the tough pocket of lefty hitters. Finnegan, because he has the splitter that seems to be platoon neutral. And he just had better numbers than against lefties than Jansen invested. And then you'll have Jansen invest against those pockets of tough righties. You know, when Hinch can get that done, you know, he likes to mess around earlier in the game to get the bats out of there. But I will say, and Hinch is very mindful, I think, and you see this a lot in spring training in particular, very mindful of players, of personal connections, of milestones, things like that. Like you'll see in spring training, he'll take guys on the bus to visit another town because, oh, that's the team they used to play for, or they've got family there or something like that. And so I don't think he's going to be blind to the fact that Kenley Jansen is 24 saves away from being the third pitcher ever to have 500. And I think he's going to get Jansen those chances, probably especially early in the year when he can. And then, you know, as the season bears out, and if he's continuing to pitch well, then he'll just kind of be the closer. But I think Hitch is definitely going to try to get him those opportunities early on, and particularly probably in you know, he doesn't believe really in like, oh, it's the time to bring the closer in. But if it's like a 3-run lead and he can get a save, he's going to bring Jansen in, I think.
I agree with you 100% on that. I think unless Kenley Jansen blows it, it's going to be his role and he's going to be able to be that regular closer, if you will. I'm not saying he's going to get every save situation, but I think more often than not, we're going to see Kenley Jansen in the closer role. And I don't know if AJ Hinch is going to call him the closer, but I think it's going to be like as close to a closer as maybe we've seen since the Gregory Soto days. What I really do like though about these three is that they're all different. The Tigers are going to be able to throw different looks at opposing hitters. Kenley Jansen, you have the power cutter that has the late glove side movement. It's a unique shape. It makes hitters uncomfortable. And then Kyle Finnegan, it's the splitter, the fastball combination, and the splitter, it's shown that it can miss bats. I think he probably needs to do a better job of using the fastball to set up the splitter. For example, I think Kyle Finnegan can benefit from throwing more fastballs at the bottom of the zone. Casey Mize actually talked about this a lot last spring training, where it's not just fastball up, splitter down. Now you're throwing fastball up, fastball down, and splitter down. I think fastballs down will help keep hitters guessing, especially now that he's throwing the splitter like 65% of the time. If it's just fastball up and splitter down, you can really start to eliminate that fastball and you can hunt the splitter, or vice versa. You can eliminate the splitter and you can hunt the fastball. I think you have to be able to paint that fastball on the bottom rail of the strike zone and then throw the splitter off of that. And I think that opens up a world of opportunities where you're missing bats up top and you're also missing bats at the bottom of the zone, and you're freezing hitters for called third strikes with that fastball at the bottom as well. So I do think they're, with a little bit of an adjustment in location and where Kyle Finnegan is throwing the fastball, I do think that splitter can get back to missing bats. We did see it get exposed down the stretch last season, especially when he came back from the injury when teams started to realize, hey, he's throwing his splitter this much and he's really not throwing the fastball down at all, they were pretty easily able to eliminate one or the other and then just hunt. They could hunt splitter if they wanted to. They could hunt fastball if they wanted to. If he gets that fastball down, I think it opens things up for him. And then Will Vest, it's just a nasty slider and a sneaky elite fastball. The slider has like a 45% whiff rate. That's outstanding. We don't really need to talk very much about that. But the fastball, it wasn't as good from a result standpoint in 2025, but it was like the elite among the elite in 2024. So to me, it's still an elite fastball. And then obviously an elite slider. And I think Will Vest has a mentality to handle any situation. And I think he's only getting better. You've talked about this in the past. I think Will Vest could be a good roving, high leverage reliever. You want to use him in the 5th? Go ahead. You want to use him in the 7th? Sure, why not? You want to use him in the 9th? If Jansen's down and it's time for Will Vest, bring him in. You got to go multiple innings. Will Vest will give it to you. Like, he is that kind of a dude. I think the mentality side of the game has only gotten better. He's done a really good job of getting out of an inning, unleashing all those emotions, and then being able to channel it back again and go out for another inning. He used to struggle with that. And now he's a lot better at being able to do that. That makes him more versatile as a multiple inning, high leverage reliever. You can use him in a lot of different spots. Will Vest, he's probably my preseason sneaky MVP of the bullpen, even though I do think Kenley Jansen is going to lead in saves, and Kyle Finnegan, maybe he might be the sexiest name of the bunch because of what he did after the trade deadline last year. But it's cutter from Kenley Jansen, splitter from Kyle Finnegan, slider from Will Vest. Like, you can attack a lot of different pockets of hitters with those guys. Nobody is the same type of reliever. So I think that's just going to bode well for the Tigers, regardless of the specific path to win in the late innings. All right, I want to transition to the farm system because this is something that you are an expert in, so I'm going to lean on you heavily here. Going into 2026, who are some breakout candidates for prospects?
I mean, this is tough. Everybody's definition of breakout is a little bit different. And some of these guys, I'm going to mention, if you're a super hardcore prospects person, you probably already know about them.
I better hear Kelvis Salcedo.
So Kelvis Salcedo was one of I have 6 names here. I'll try to power through them. I started with some bats. We'll start at the top with John Peck, who was already on like some top 30 lists. He is their 7th rounder for 2023. Infielder, legitimate shortstop defender. Like, I wouldn't say like he's a gold glover there or anything like that, but he could play shortstop. Has a really strong arm, so he can play third as well and second. Good athlete, above average runner, hits the ball really hard, doesn't chase a lot. He's pretty aggressive, but he stays in the zone. So his walk rate rose and his strikeout rate fell when he got up to AA this year. And he's still relatively young for a college guy. He's going to be 23. It's his age 23 season. He turns 24 in like late July. But he's a guy, I wouldn't say he's going to be an everyday infielder down the road, but he's got a lot of things you like. He just needs to lift the ball a little bit more. And if he does that, then he can be a strong utility man and maybe like a second division regular shortstop. So I think he's a kind of underrated. Another guy, and we'll go the 7th round again, is Jackson Strong, an outfielder from Canisius. He was the 7th rounder in 2024. He's a lefty. And what's interesting about him is he's kind of similar to Peck. He's got above average speed and above average power, but he's a legitimate like center fielder. And what he does well is he lifts the ball to the pull field. He's a guy who's probably going to get the most out of his power because of his batted ball profile. He's got a little bit too much swing and miss, and a strikeout rate's a little elevated, but he might be one of those guys who actually benefits from swinging a little bit more. He does walk at a fairly high clip, but he sees a lot of pitches. So if he can just attack pitches earlier, he might break out next year. The third hitter I'll mention is Angel de Los Santos, who is, this is a really young guy. He's not even 18 yet. He's part of the same international class, the 2025 class that Chris Rodriguez was in. And he's a, bigger name, but de Los Santos, and he was also hurt for like half of the Dominican Summer League season, but he came out and hit 370 with good extra base power, like 9 doubles in just 99 plate appearances, and he's a legitimate shortstop. So I think he'll probably come stateside and start playing in the complex league this year as an 18-year-old. And, if he continues hitting and is a legitimate shortstop, that's a very interesting prospect. So now we'll get to some pitchers. We'll touch on your guy, Kelvis Salcedo. Really fun story. I mean, you could argue that of all these people that he's already had his breakout, but if you don't know him, he is a big, strong kid, not quite 20. He'll be 20 very soon. Signed out of Venezuela in 2023. And he just absolutely dominated the Florida Complex League and then the Florida State League last year. Fastball has been up to 99. It's not his best pitch, though. It doesn't miss a ton of bats, although he does have a sinker that's basically just as hard that batters cannot lift. But he's got absolutely filthy sort of slider cutter combo and a devastating splitter. Just 50% whiff rates on both of those pitches in the minors. And batters hit like 140 against him last year. Just a nasty combination of stuff. And the best part about it is he threw a ton of strikes. He wasn't walking guys. He's built like a reliever. and there's a little bit of violence to his delivery where you could project him as a reliever down the road. You're going to have to keep tabs on his body because he's like 6 foot, 240, 250. He's a big boy. But the stuff and the strike throwing is there to be a mid-rotation starter down the road. So he's really exciting. I'll follow with him. We'll go to the 7th round again. I guess that's the sleeper round. Cale Wetwiska is a guy they drafted last year out of a JUCO in Oklahoma. And it was funny because any of the draft broadcasts that were going on, nobody had any idea who he was. He was completely off their radar. They thought he was an outfielder. But what's interesting about him is you watch him and he's got a very high, tall and fall delivery forgive me, I don't remember who pointed this out on Twitter, but somebody pointed out that it's a lot like Matt Manning. And what you see is a fastball that sits 93, 94, has been up to 96, a ton of extension, a lot of spin and ride, and he's got feel for a changeup and a pretty interesting cutter. And so you got to get him some innings in pro ball, but it's a pretty darn good arm for a guy that you picked up in the 7th round. And I'd be very curious to see how he looks throughout the course of this season. If you can get a Matt Manning in the 7th round, that's all right. And then the final guy I mentioned, and this is my own personal cheese ball, if you will, is a kid named Jhonan Coba. It's a cool last name, Coba. And he's a guy who was signed in May of 24, March 24, something like that, out of, I think he's out of Venezuela as well. Forgive me if I got that wrong, but a really sort of thin, athletic pitcher, right-hander. And when you watch him, you see a lot of flashes. He looks like what a high school pitcher would look like when you're going to give him like $500,000, like not a Jackson Jobe first rounder, but like somebody where you see the flashes of everything. And when you catch him on the right day, it's fastball sitting 95, touching 97 with a ton of life. And he'll show you a pretty nasty breaking ball and then a really good changeup too. Again, he's young. The strikes aren't always there. Sometimes he's spiking it in the dirt and he's going to need some time, but just the pieces are there for him to be a really interesting pitcher down the road. So that's a guy I'm keeping an eye on this year.
For more on all those prospects, keep tabs on TigersMLReport.com with Chris Brown and Rogelio Castillo. Nobody covers the Tigers farm system better than those guys. All right, it's time to get out of here. Thanks to Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report for co-hosting with me this week. Again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays to everyone. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Most importantly, give us a rating and comment what you think about the show. Stick with freep.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, and our magical producer, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.